This is my actual, like, secondary school tie, by the way. It's got my name on it and everything. Never once did I wear it like this. Absolutely not. I was a house prefect, for goodness sake. Because obviously I was. Oh my god, hey! Welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. If you don't know me, I am Mickey Joe. I am obsessed with all things theatre, and I am a professional theatre critic here on social media. You may be watching this on my theatre-themed YouTube channel. You may be listening to it as a podcast. Shout out to you if you are. I'm wearing a school uniform. It was cute in my head. I don't know if it's weird. I'm in my late 20s now. But that is because today I will be sharing with you my full review of Babies, the world premiere fully staged production of this brand new musical. Brand new musical? That makes sense. This newborn musical, shall we say, from writers Martha Geelan and Jack Godfrey. The show just recently opened at the Other Palace Theatre in London, where it will be playing until the 14th of July, and it is set in a British secondary school, featuring a bunch of Year 11 students who are tasked with looking after robot babies for the week to teach them about parenting and responsibility. Now, this show has an enormous place in my heart for multiple reasons. You may or may not know I used to be a teacher, and I worked pretty exclusively with students of the age group being portrayed in this show. If you're watching this video and I used to teach you GCSE maths, shout out to you. I hope you're doing well. And for reasons I will articulate later in this video, it does a fantastic job of just transporting me back to the more wholesome memories of my short-lived teaching career. But also, I have had a chance to watch this show developing from the workshop stage to a staged concert last year in the West End to this now world premiere fully staged production, and I have loved it every step of the way. In fact, when I saw the workshop version, I think I called this the best workshop that I had ever seen. I do get the chance occasionally to go and see shows in that really early developmental stage, and this worked in that room, in that space. It was one of the best pieces of theatre I'd seen that week, that month, that year, just in the middle of the afternoon in a no costume, no set really workshop presentation. You could tell in that room straight away that it was going to work, whatever the production would look like. But today I'm going to let you know what that production does look like with this review. So stay tuned for all of my thoughts about Babies, as well as to find out a little bit more about the show. Now, if you enjoy this review, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel or follow me wherever you're seeing or hearing this review. Make sure to stay tuned for many more reviews coming soon, and comment down below if you have had the chance to see Babies, what you think of the show. I'm very intrigued to hear your thoughts. Finally, if you would like more tips about new and upcoming exciting musical theatre before it opens in the UK, I do tend to post more about these types of shows, especially over on Instagram, so you can go and find me at Mickey Joe Theatre on Instagram. But for now, let's talk about Babies at the Other Palace Theatre. So here's the concept then. This is a 2-act musical featuring 9 Year 11 students. There are no adult characters portrayed in the show. We exclusively get the perspectives and the relationships and the issues of these like 16-year-old Year 11 students. They're about to do their GCSE exams. If you are British, you know all too well what that means. And if you're American, that's just like the big exams that they do when they're 16, which you probably got from the context of the sentence. But listen, I'm here to explain. I remain a teacher at heart. Now, I mentioned that there are 9 characters within the show, and it does have this sort of a come-from-away-esque positioning where we do hear from all of them equally. There are a couple whose stories emerge a little bit more just because they have heavier stuff going on, and some of the other characters sort of revolve around them, but everyone is dealing with their own stuff, just like you actually are in secondary school. And a lot of the issues portrayed within the show are very real issues affecting students and young people of that age. It talks about, you know, the ones having to deal with complicated situations at home, having to deal with single parent households or being raised by grandparents, coming to terms with sexuality, with gender identity, trying to decide if they're ready for relationships, a very new component of teenage life, which is social media. There is a character who is an influencer who is navigating that world, who is actually a professional influencer who's doing like a paid promotion, which is not something I conceive of happening at 16, but I guess does, which is baffling. Also internal and external stress and all sorts of pressures and peer pressure and the desire to fit in, to be popular, but also to do well academically, like all of these things. And what's great about the breadth of this company of characters is that we get to experience all of those issues in a way that feels authentic. You know, like it's not just tokenized to one person dealing with one particular thing. Everyone experiences overlap in what they're going through. They don't all necessarily realize it until the end, until they've had the opportunity to talk openly about their feelings. But many of the characters who are just commencing a difficult journey are alongside characters who have already sort of done a lot of that, who can impart advice. And it does just feel very honest in that way. A big part of which I can only assume is the fact that this was developed originally with British youth music theatre, with a very large youth company within the UK. So the show was workshopped with a group of young performers who had the opportunity to help shape that material, and that's why the adolescent voice feels very authentic in this. And that's the thing I find very charming about it. It's just listening to them talk and the way that they are portrayed and the characterization. It's so familiar of the students that I used to teach, so many of them. Like, I can link them to specific individuals that I remember, and they remind me so much. I'm just so quickly transported, even though we're not seeing really traditional classroom scenarios. Like I told you, adult characters are not depicted within this show, so we see brief moments of lessons, but we see the moments of lessons where they're having conversations with each other while getting on with something. We don't really see them being taught. We mostly see after school and at lunch and between lessons and moments when they're supposed to be in lessons but they're not. In terms of the authentic adolescent voice, the other brilliant thing here is the casting approach, where you have not specifically 16-year-old age-appropriate actors, but young, talented, recent graduates, young performers early in their career who bring that same fresh, exciting familiarity, who can remember what it was like to be dealing with all of these things in year 11, but are also really exciting performers on the cusp of huge professional careers. I think it's another of those shows, like the original Broadway production of Spring Awakening, that down the line we will look back on as having discovered and unleashed an entire new generation of brilliant talent. Anyway, I'd started telling you about the plot. The conceit of the thing, whether or not this actually happens in British schools, I didn't experience this, but I was at an all-boys school that had a very different stance on this particular type of social education. They are each given these high-tech robot plastic baby simulators to take care of for the duration of the school week in order to teach them responsibility, but also as a teen pregnancy deterrent. There you go. I should have remembered that because it's in the lyrics of the opening number. Some of them are excited about this, some of them are more cautiously excited about this, some of them are completely indifferent to the idea, and some of them object to it straight away, each for their own reasons, but what happens next might just surprise them and us. Because among the students who seemed like they weren't going to take this seriously whatsoever and they were going to behave irresponsibly are some who rise to the occasion and find that they have an innate sort of a skill for parenting, and there are others who find it much harder than they had been anticipating. And it's through the babies, I guess, that they learn things about themselves, and once they've done that, about each other. Now, it's very much your traditional book musical. You have these really great scenes written by Martha Geelan, interspersed with these bangers of songs scored by Jack Godfrey. Now, if you've heard me sing Jack Godfrey's praises before, it's because I think he is one of the most exciting up-and-coming composers in the entire musical theatre sphere right now. Another of his shows, 42 Balloons, recently had its world premiere production at the Lowry Theatre in Salford. There's another being workshopped right now. He's just fantastic. If you haven't had a chance to listen to his stuff yet, and he is so brilliant at emulating different pop music styles, because 42 Balloons is all very retro, very nostalgic, very 1980s, nodding to different songs and iconic things, and this is completely early 2000s pop, very boy bandy, very McFly, very Busted, little bits of One Direction here and there, which I love because it's all of the music that I grew up with at school discos, and I think I'm pretty close to his age, so I dare say it is for him as well. But if you haven't yet, do go and give the score a listen. It doesn't really give you too many spoilers, so it's an easy one to listen to beforehand, and I promise you will find yourself vibing and jamming to this soundtrack. I wish I could find a more eloquent way of telling you that it is just completely full of bops and bangers, but that's absolutely what it is. The man knows how to write a compelling hook. The lyrics are fun. You will leave the theatre going, baby, baby, baby. There are also some brilliantly well-written monologue songs, which we know from 42 Balloons is something that Jack Godfrey can do very well. Songs like Work and Without Saying Goodbye and All of My Friends. But probably the highlights of the score are the up-tempo, high-energy boy band-inspired numbers, the best of which is Hot Dad. which is just, oh my god, it's a gift of a musical theatre moment. This has always been a show-stopping number. It's quite possibly the standout moment of the show, and it's better situated in this newest version of the material, which has only been tinkered with very lightly here and there, I will say, since I first saw it, because it arises more naturally out of a conversation where Ash, a non-binary character, is beginning to find out that they might not have realised that they were hot, which as a plotline I just love, by the way, because, I mean, first of all, I love that the show has meaningful and authentic LGBTQIA plus representation, and we meet multiple characters across that spectrum who are experiencing different journeys, and for the most part, it's not telling coming out stories, it's also not telling traumatic LGBTQIA plus teen stories, like a trans narrative on stage for a young person in an educational context that gets to be about them not having realised that they were hot and coming to terms with that is fun, especially against the grueling backdrop of everything going on for the trans community right now in this country and worldwide. But back to Hot Dad, it's now born out of that moment of wide-eyed realisation for Ash that, especially in the context of having the babies with them, the boys might seem more attractive to the girls, and so Ash and the boys on stage perform this boy band stylized number called Hot Dad, which is so One Direction-esque. It goes full spoof and it is absolutely inspired. And the way that Alexandra Sarmiento, the choreographer, has staged the number delivers this on all fronts as well, because we slowly build towards exactly what we want, which is the boys just like headbanging, giving it boy band choreography on a table, and it's just great. It's so good. That being said, a number that I always forget how much I enjoy is one that comes quite early on. I think it's called Stupid Piece of Plastic, but it has one of the best hooks in the show because it goes like, maybe I don't need this thing, maybe da da ba ba ba, maybe I don't need some special scheme to save me from myself. I just love the melody so much. It gets into my head and just like strokes all the parts of my brain. I love it. In terms of the numbers, it begins to become this thing like a Cats or like a Six, where each character gets the opportunity to sing about their own unique situation, but it's not done in a way that begins to feel formulaic, which I like. Truly, this score by Jack Godfrey is where everything I love about musical theatre and also everything I love about the pop music that I grew up with, that it still exists as a guilty pleasure, intersect, and one of my favourite scores of the entire year. But I was telling you about the material, and I feel like I've started telling you about the production, so let's fully segue now. Why do I love this production so much? Now, I've told you about Jack's brilliance. I want to talk about Martha here, because Martha, not only the writer of the book and Jack's collaborator, I call them co-parents of the show because it's called Babies, but Martha is also the director, and I credit her hugely with the brilliant tone of the show and how comforting it is and how easily rewatchable it is and how funny and light-hearted but serious enough it is. I think it's so perfectly pitched in delivering something uplifting and satisfying that still does justice to the stuff that young people have to deal with, to like the legitimate, difficult stuff that young people have to deal with, and not making that seem frivolous. I do think a major component of that is just having these young characters on stage and not having any kind of like an older authority figure. I think that's really for the best, because it just situates them on stage as people and not as younger children in any kind of a comparison. But it's the duality of being both writer and director, which I've been calling parent and midwife, that I find very interesting here, because it doesn't always work, but I think when someone has the requisite skills to do both things, it can be hugely advantageous. Because what is this show really, if not its characters? This show is about its characters and each of their personalities and each of the journeys that they go on, and it really wins because of these different characterizations and how they intersect, and the friendships that we see and the alliances and the rivalries and the eventual coming together. That's what's satisfying about it. And who knows these characters better than the writer who has been developing them over various productions? And so it situates Martha as director to have all of the ingredients necessary to deliver the perfect tone which the show has. It's also what I think will make it really popular with young musical theatre audiences, but it's not uniquely for young people. Like I said, I'm in my late 20s now, and I still really love this show. It reminds me not only of teaching, but also of being in year 11 and going through all of this stuff. So anyone who is in school now or has been in school, I think will have something to relate to about this piece. But in particular, for young people who love a Heathers, who love a high school set show, and who love shows where young people are really given the opportunity to express themselves and, you know, taken seriously on stage. That is something Babies does very well, better than almost any other show, I'm going to say. Now, you're hearing an awful lot of positives from me. If you know me and you know me well, you know I almost always have at least one note. And for this one, I think it's the set design. Now, I love the costuming. This has been done by the same person. This is by Jasmine Swan. I really love the costuming and how everyone can express their own individuality. You know, they're sharing a school uniform discernibly, but everyone has styled it differently to express themselves in different ways. And the concept of the set design I can absolutely get behind, because it invokes the image of a classroom, and we have these tables that move around, and we have this bright blue backdrop at the back projecting sky, and they've kind of gutted the other palace. If you've seen another show here before, this space is going to feel larger and wider and more open than it ever has before, because they have kind of stripped it back to the walls, and they use a lot of those spaces right at the edges of the stage where they're entering in and out of the auditorium doors as playing spaces. I kind of feel like the whole thing could be brought in a little bit more centrally, because there is something of a sense of being at a theatrical tennis match just occasionally. While I'm pivoting to the direction slightly, there are also a few moments early in the show where there's a little bit too much chaos. I feel like some of the group numbers where we have other people on stage in freeze frame, or doing sort of like backup dancing style choreography, or doing vocals even, and participating in other characters' internal monologues, it's just occasionally a little bit too busy. And whether that could be done with fewer people on stage, as in just a couple for each number, or whether there's a few more moments where we don't actually need to have that whatsoever and people can have a little bit more space, I don't know. But I do like the contrast that it creates when we have this one character, Leah, who is probably going through one of the biggest challenges in terms of her home situation. She has this estranged relationship with her mother, who is not in a great place, and she's made the decision not to tell any of her friends about it, which is isolating her emotionally. And so the way that's represented on stage is we see it isolating her physically. So when she's going through this, she is for the most part consistently alone on stage. And so creating the contrast of the different problems that her friends are experiencing and having people creating their lives around them as backing dancers, and Leah just being completely alone in hers, does create that difference between them. Although at the end of the show, there's a really beautiful thing where we see that Leah and Jasmine, who had nothing in common at the beginning, kind of find some common ground in the pressure and the stress that they've been experiencing, albeit for very different reasons. And so I wonder if Jasmine's internal monologue, as a little bit of a parallel, could have more of a resemblance to that as well, because she isolates herself at the same time. Spoiler alert, I relate quite a lot to Jasmine, because she is this determined, driven overachiever who has to be successful in this project because she has to be successful in everything, otherwise her life is going to be a disaster. And that was me at school, being like, if I don't get an A star in GCSE Latin, then the world will end. I know what that path feels like, and I know what that life feels like, and I guess to all of them they feel very isolated. I mean, there's a character called Grace who sings a song about feeling isolated and feeling alone, but she does it by talking about seeing all of her friends around her, so you need the ensemble around that. I feel like Jasmine could be staged in a way when she's singing her solo song called Work, all about her commitment to, you know, being the best and doing her best and striving and achieving. I feel like she could be more alone on stage when that happens. But back to the set design. I've become waylaid. So the thing I'm not particularly enamoured with is these two scaffolding units, and I was intrigued about them at the beginning. They've got steps running up two sides of them and then a little platform at the top, and there's one location we go to near the school, presumably, where they gather and hang out on a cliffside, which we return to at multiple points throughout the show, and so they set that atop one of these scaffolding towers, and that conjures that well enough, but the aesthetic of them doesn't really give me school vibes. Erin, my fiance, made the very smart point that if they were to look like school PE equipment, like the multicolored things that you used to have on the wall of one side of the school hall. I don't know if this is a universal experience or just something that Erin and I both had at our schools, but immediately when he was describing it, I was like, oh yeah, those things. I also think there could be more like lines on the floor and like that school bench style of thing. They have lockers on stage, which I do think are a big help for creating slightly different locations in the way that they're moved around and really invoking the sense of school corridors. But these two scaffolding towers, they don't even really get turned around that much. And considering that choreographer Alexandra Sarmiento was in the Heights at the King's Cross Theatre, which featured some of the best use of those moving step units and platforms I have ever seen on stage, I would have liked to see these used in more interesting ways. Like, they turn slightly and there are lights on them, but they don't feel like they're getting utilised to their full effect, and I don't think the visual of them particularly conjures what we need for it to. I don't know why there's two of them other than just symmetry and needing to have some sort of a set on stage. It's kind of maybe a challenge that comes with the show, that the material works so well wherever you set it that you begin to question what the set does need to look like, because it doesn't need much. I'm just not sure that this is quite it. I think if anything, we could lean more into it looking even more like schools specifically, because then when we see their lives outside of school and when we see their home situations and it's being conjured from, like, you create a bed out of a table and like you use a locker for some sort of other purpose, you get the sense, theatrically speaking, that their entire lives revolve around school, which is what it can feel like in GCSE year in year 11, right? The other thing about the scaffolding towers in conjunction with the choreography, which I will say I largely enjoy very much throughout, and it captures that same feel as the music, that early 2000s pop music, boy band vibe, and it's very fun and it's very teenage as well. Like, they don't feel like they're doing like high level, like contemporary dance. They feel like they're just bopping around at a school disco, but it looks great. The problem comes with another really great song right at the end of the second act, and they're singing, "Oh, kids these days, they probably did it for a TikTok craze," and there's like a quiet version of that melody at the start of the chorus, and then it comes back in, you get a do-do-do-do-ba, "Oh, kids right here," and it's so good. When that melody comes back in, I swear to God, if I was performing that on a stage, I would have the strength to kick a door off its hinges. I could kick a window out of a public bus because it's such a oomph moment. And for the most part, almost every time it happens, you feel like they want to have a choreographed jump or something, and it wants one of those like bam moments. But most of them are stuck halfway up a step unit, and they have to then take the time to come down before they can start really dancing, and they're kind of stuck up there, so we can't get the choreography that the music deserves. But this show is not its choreography and it's not its set pieces. Those are embellishing details on what is the material, which is really fantastic material. It's such a great show, and a big part of that is because it leads with its characters. So let me tell you about the cast of Babies at the Other Palace. So Ashley Go plays Alex and brings so much authenticity and charm to the role, but also this really wry humour that I very much enjoy. Alex clearly delights in challenging authority and the status quo, but is not ultimately that misbehaved. There's a new detail in this one where Alex has an outside hobby and goes climbing, which gets talked about an awful lot. Like, there's a lot of climbing references, and you know, it makes sense for talking us into one particular conversation. I feel like it's mentioned just one too many times because we just hear a lot about climbing. I think maybe it's the first one that happens where there's a carabiner attached to the baby when they're first beginning to complain, when it's dawned on them the realities of having to take these babies around all the time and be inseparable from them, and Alex sings, "I tried to take it climbing but it wouldn't let me climb," and everyone else has said just like very generic things, and that feels oddly specific in that moment. There's another character called Grace, who is played by Viola Maisie, and Grace is a dancer, and this also gets talked about a lot, but isn't really essential to her characterization, other than being just like one more stressful thing going on in her life that we as an audience can understand is stressful without much explanation. Like, she gets to say, "I've got all the dance stuff going on," and everyone goes, "Oh yeah, you don't need to explain that," and so they don't, because they don't really have the time to explain that, because Grace isn't really at the forefront. I think Alex and Grace are sort of some of the less featured characters, albeit only very slightly. But if we do see Grace dancing by herself in this version, I kind of missed it. She does have a solo number, but it doesn't really have a dance section. Like, for her to be this aspiring dancer, I feel like we would expect to see her dance a little bit more, and that would be how she would express herself. Like, she dances as much as all of them dance, but if there was a moment where Grace had a big dance moment I missed it. Bradley Riches plays Toby, who is this gift of a character. He is sassy, he is gay, he is confident and comfortable. There's a prerequisite ounce of loneliness and insecurity that comes with that, which just feels like an essential part of the secondary school gay experience, honestly. And that gets revealed more seriously later on in the show, but is also kind of suggested through funny throwaway comedy lines towards the beginning. Bradley also had a moment during Hot Dad where it was like a slow reclining leg extension over his head, leg goes back down and then kicks the leg over the head a second time. I did not know Bradley Riches could dance like that. If you don't know, Bradley Riches is one of the stars of Netflix's Heartstopper, but plays quite a different character in this, much more extroverted and very funny. Brilliant characterization. Another of the show's company members, Morgan Phillips, alternates the role of Toby at certain performances, and I've seen Morgan doing the role in developmental versions of the show, and I'm a huge fan of Morgan's as well, so also worth seeing that performance. Now, Toby has to share custody of his baby with the character of Jacob, who wasn't at school last year and has come back to school this year, and we come to find out a little bit more about why that is, but for the most part we don't really explore Jacob's life, we explore Jacob's dynamic with Toby. Jacob is played by Nathan Johnston in this production. While we're talking about Nathan, there's also one particular riff he did in Hot Dad that made me lose my entire mind. And without dispensing too many obvious spoilers about what happens with Jacob, I have seen performers in the role before that I haven't necessarily bought the revelation, and with Nathan I do. Like, I understand the layers of this character, and from the beginning as it kind of peels away and you get to know a little bit more about Jacob, I can see it. I would like for the dynamic between Jacob and Toby to become, you know, just a little bit more chemistry there, because the indifference turns to fondness neatly enough, which is fine, it works dramatically, but you kind of want there to be that little bit more of an intriguing buzz in the middle where they're still not really friends yet, but there's something between them. Because it isn't Heartstopper, which devotes a lot more mileage to that. This show's agenda and responsibility is not in depicting one particular relationship out of all of these characters on stage, so it doesn't have as much time to devote, so we really need to see the hallmarks of that quite clearly. Now, there is another relationship depicted on stage between Jana Brock Patel and Max Mulrennan. She is an influencer named Becky who is dealing with a lot of social media stress, and she finds quite quickly that her audience is responding to like a connection to the babies, and that's something that increasingly she isn't really feeling, and she can't understand why, and she's getting frustrated about it. She's also getting frustrated by the devotion and affection of her boyfriend Ben. He is just doing his best to try and take care of the kids. There is a huge amount of comedy arising from just how endearing he is and how enthusiastically loving he is, and how over-the-top supportive he is, and acting like they are grown-ups already and that these are their actual kids, and he's pushing them around in like a twin pram, and he's saying, I'm so proud of us, we can do this, and like she's acting beyond her years as well, because she's talking to her followers and saying like, oh, mummy brain, it's such a real thing, even though she hasn't given birth. But they probably give us two of the most fun characters on stage. Jana also fronts an entire number called Someone Else when she's singing about her social media routine, the last verse of which gets a little bit of a twist and feels a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more emotional, as she's just like trying to push all of these negative thoughts to the back of her mind and present a very perfect version of her everyday life while giving you show-stopping vocals. She sounds fantastic. But they are not the only comedy characters on stage, because we also have Lulu. Oh, Lulu, sweet Lulu, played by the frankly genius Lucy Carter. Now, Lulu is a character who just wants so badly to be popular, and specifically to be friends with Becky and to have that same influencer lifestyle, and, you know, to feel that acceptance. And we see her striving so hard for it, and she has such an eagerness, and it's heartwarming and heartbreaking all at the same time. She's also completely kooky. Her baby is dressed quite quickly in rainbow-covered knitwear. I will say as well, one of the sort of accidental strengths of this show is the material is very funny, and the characterizations are very funny, and the performers are very funny, but every so often something just becomes funny again because they're holding a baby. Like, there's something about that visual that just, you notice it again after a few moments, and it keeps being funny. But Lucy is incredibly sweet as Lulu and had me beside myself before the start of the second act, because she comes on a little bit early, setting up her house for what she believes is going to be a very quiet movie night with her new friend Becky. Things don't exactly go according to plan, but the way that she then deals with the ensuing situation, also hilarious. Finally, if I told you there was a little bit of a balance between which characters we see more of and which characters we see less of, here are two of the most consequential characters in the narrative, Jasmine and Leah. Jasmine is played by Lauren Conroy, who, by the way, is about to play Zoe Murphy in the upcoming UK tour of Dear Evan Hansen, and Leah is played by Zoe Athena. Lauren's been with this show for the last few stages of its development. Zoe is completely new to the production, but both of them have these really brilliant, nuanced takes on these characters. They are probably giving you the most sculpted, dimensional acting performances on that stage. They also have the weightiest material to contend with. Zoe, like I mentioned, is struggling with a lot of issues in her personal life, with her family, a lot of stuff going on outside of school, and the way that that manifests is in this sort of very guarded persona that she brings, very bolshy. It's not always hostile and aggressive, because there's a smile and a swagger to it as well. I recognize this specifically from so many of the students who I met and who I taught, and the detail with which she's characterized this is really spot on and eerily familiar, and just a fantastic performance that she gives. She gets some really emotional outpouring moments in the second act as everything comes to a head. She does a fantastic job. And Lauren Conroy gives our narrative purpose throughout, because she is the closest thing that we get to an antagonist, because she sort of turns herself into one. Everyone is just trying to do their best, and she specifically, as this overachiever as Jasmine, is very much trying to do her best, but it's also important to her that her best is better than everyone else. And where she believes that she is perceiving unfairness because another student is suddenly being praised who has never previously excelled or never previously really applied themselves in academic work, she sets herself the goal of taking this student down and rising above and succeeding. And so she becomes this sort of a delicious self-made villain, but beneath all of that, there's the struggle of what she's dealing with, which we can see in her solo song, even though she can't really yet see it for herself. But in a really perfect ratio, she mixes together the stress that Jasmine is dealing with this comic, villainized persona. It's a brilliant performance. And like I said, these are all incredibly exciting rising stars. If you want to go and see them before they become the stars of tomorrow, go and check out Babies at the Other Palace Theatre. Also go and see it because it's just a brilliant show. Like I said, this show has my heart. I cannot recommend this enough. If you want exciting new musical theatre, if you want some of the best, most fun music that you've heard on stage, if you want nostalgia, if you are a young person who wants to see yourself represented on stage, for all of those reasons and more, go and check out Babies. It is running for another month. Thank you so much for watching this review video or listening to it as a podcast. I hope that you've enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to me here on YouTube, turn on those notifications so you don't miss my upcoming West End and Broadway reviews. If you are listening to this on a podcast platform, then follow me wherever that is, and you can also go find me on other social media platforms. I am on X, the app formerly known as Twitter, I am on TikTok, and I am on Instagram as Mickey Joe Theatre. Make sure to comment down below with all of your thoughts about Babies, if you have seen it already at the Other Palace Theatre, and if you haven't yet, please book your tickets, go and check out this show. I love it, and it deserves to be a huge success, and more so than anything else, I really want that younger generation of musical theatre fan to discover this show, because I think they're going to love it. In the meantime, I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I hope that everyone is staying safe, and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!